The man's voice was polite. That was the worst part. He didn't shout. He didn't sneer. He simply folded his hands on the table, looked past Lena like she was a window rather than a person, and said, "Perhaps the teacher should step outside. This portion of the discussion is for investors." 30 heads turned. Not toward him. Toward her. Lena Brooks stood at the end of that long polished table, 31 floors above Seoul, holding a folder that contained 4 years of work, 3 remortgage decisions, and the futures of children whose names these men would never bother to learn. The room smelled like money. The kind of money that had never once worried about itself. She felt the heat rise from her collarbone to her jaw. Not embarrassment. Something older than that. Something she had learned, a long time ago, to carry without flinching. The board member who had spoken, silver-haired, expensive suit, the particular confidence of a man who had never been asked to leave a room in his life, was already turning back to his papers. As far as he was concerned, the matter was settled. She would gather her things. She would smile politely. She would disappear. And the worst part was, he wasn't even angry. He just didn't see her. Lena set her folder down slowly. She straightened the edge of it against the table. She looked once around the room, at the faces that were waiting, at the faces that were uncomfortable, at the few that were simply curious to see what she would do. She had been here before. Not in Seoul. Not in this building. But in this moment, this specific species of dismissal, she had been here more times than she could count. In school board meetings where she was the only black woman in the room. In funding hearings where someone kept interrupting her. In conversations where she watched people decide, before she spoke, that what she had to say wasn't worth the time. She knew what dignity looked like from the outside. Still spine. Quiet hands. Eyes that didn't drop. She knew what it cost on the inside. She picked up her folder. She turned toward the door. The chair at the head of the table slid back. The sound was small, just wood against floor, but it stopped the room like a gunshot. Kong Jun-seo stood up. He was not a large man. He didn't need to be. There was something in the way he occupied space, a stillness, a weight, that made the air around him feel different. Every person at that table had spent years learning to read his expressions, and what they saw now made several of them sit slightly straighter without realizing it. He said 4 words. "If she leaves, we're done." Nobody moved. One of the junior executives opened his mouth and closed it again. The silver-haired man who had spoken looked up slowly, the way people look up when they're deciding whether to be confused or offended. Chairman Kong Do-hyun, seated 2 chairs to Jun-seo's left, the kind of stillness about him that came from decades of watching rooms and knowing exactly how to wait, narrowed his eyes by a fraction. Then Jun-seo said the second thing. The thing that changed the temperature of the entire floor. "You are asking the wrong person to leave." Lena had stopped walking. She stood with her back still half-turned, her hand not quite touching the door. She was listening. But she was also doing something else. She was looking at him. Studying him the way she had always studied people who surprised her. Looking for the seam between performance and truth. There was something about his face. She couldn't name it yet. It sat at the edge of recognition, not his features exactly, but the way he held his jaw. The particular quality of his stillness. Like someone who had learned, a long time ago, to go very quiet in rooms that wanted him smaller. She had seen that before. She just couldn't remember where. Jun-seo wasn't looking at the board. He was looking at her. And in his eyes was something that had no business being in a room like this. Something careful and old, and she would think about this later, in the elevator, in the cab, at 2 a.m. in her hotel room. Something that looked, impossibly, like relief. The silver-haired man cleared his throat. "Mr. Kong, surely we can." "Sit down, Ms. Brooks." Jun-seo's voice hadn't changed volume. It had changed something else. "Please." He pulled out the chair beside him. The most powerful seat at the table. And Lena Brooks, who had come to Seoul with a folder full of children's futures and a bone-deep knowledge of what it felt like to be underestimated, made a decision in the space of one breath. She walked back to the table. She sat down. She opened her folder. And Kong Jun-seo, billionaire, CEO, the most feared man in that room, sat beside her with the quiet, intentional presence of someone who had been waiting a very long time to be exactly where he was. Nobody spoke for 3 full seconds. Then the meeting continued. But the room was different now. The air had shifted, and Lena, who had spent 20 years learning to read rooms, could feel it. She still didn't know why he'd done it. She still didn't know where she recognized him from. But she knew, the way you know things that live in your body before they reach your mind, that this was not the end of something. It was the beginning. If you've ever had to stand alone to protect your dignity, this channel was made for you. Some stories are not just about what happens. They're about the strength it takes to stand your ground, to protect your dignity, and to demand respect, even when the world tries to take it from you. If you've ever had to make a choice that tested your courage, or refused to be bought, silenced, or pushed aside, then you're in the right place. This channel tells stories about women who cannot be broken, and the people who learn, sometimes too late, that integrity cannot be bought. Welcome to Afro Korean Tales and Stories. She almost didn't come to Seoul. That was the thing nobody in that boardroom knew. That 3 weeks before her flight, Lena Brooks had sat at her kitchen table in Atlanta at 11 o'clock at night, looking at a bank statement that said what she already knew, and she had seriously, methodically, considered calling the whole thing off. The school's reserve account had $4,200 in it. She had moved $6,000 of her own money into operations over the past 7 months. Quietly, without telling her staff, because her staff had their own bills, their own children, their own quiet financial fears they carried to work every morning and never mentioned. She looked at the statement for a long time. Then she looked at the photo she kept on the corner of her desk. 31 kids, last year's 3rd grade class, standing outside the school on the last day of the year. Every single one of them grinning. Marcus in the front row, missing both front teeth, holding up a book he had read by himself for the first time in his life. She booked the flight that night. Now she was sitting in a Seoul boardroom next to the man who had just put himself between her and the room's contempt, and she still didn't fully understand why. The meeting had moved forward. Presentations. Financial projections. An infrastructure proposal from the Foundation's development team. Lena had given her portion, clearly, specifically, without rushing, and she had watched the room listen. Really listen. Because Jun Seo was listening, and this room took its cues from him like a compass takes its cues from north. When it ended, the board filed out in clusters. The silver-haired man left without looking at her. Jun Seo remained seated. Most of his staff cleared the room with the practiced efficiency of people who knew when to disappear. Chairman Kong Do-hyun was the last to leave. At the door he stopped. He looked at his nephew with a particular expression of a man who is choosing, very deliberately, to have a different conversation later. Then he left. The room was quiet. Lena closed her folder. She looked at the man across the table. He was looking at his hands. "You knew me," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "From where?" He looked up then. And she saw it, the thing she had been trying to place since the moment he stood. It wasn't his features. It was the way his eyes moved when he was choosing his words carefully. She had watched a version of that same expression hundreds of times, from the front of a classroom, in the face of a boy who was terrified of getting something wrong. "Eastview High School," he said. "Atlanta. 15 years ago." The name of the school hit her first. Then the math. Then the face. Younger, thinner, hunched at a back row desk like he was trying to take up as little space as possible. "Jun Seo," she said quietly. Not the CEO. Not the name on the building. The boy. The one who used to stay after class to practice reading because the other students laughed at his accent and he refused to let them hear him struggle in front of them. The one who learned English with a ferocity that scared her a little because she recognized it. That specific hunger of someone who knows that language is the difference between being heard and being invisible. "You wrote my scholarship letter," he said. "I remember. You called the program director. Twice." She hadn't known he knew that. He looked at her steadily. "I found out 3 years later, when I met someone who worked in that office. She told me you called personally. That you told them." He paused. He was choosing words again. "That you told them if they passed on me, They would spend the rest of their careers wondering what they missed. Lena didn't say anything. I've been looking for a way to. He stopped. Started again. When your school came through our international program review, I recognized the name. Your name. I wanted to make sure you had a fair hearing. She studied him. Was that all it was? She asked. A fair hearing? Something moved across his face. Brief. Controlled immediately. We should talk about the program, he said. Lena nodded. Slowly. Because she was a woman who had spent 20 years reading what people said when they were saying something else entirely. And what Juncio had just said, and what he had not said, were two very different things. She filed that away. There would be time. But that evening, back in her hotel room, she opened her laptop to check her email before dinner. There was a message from the Foundation's administrative office, time-stamped 40 minutes ago. The subject line read, Program Status Update. Lena Brooks / Bright Futures Academy. She opened it. She read it twice. Then she sat very still. The school's funding status had been reclassified. Effective immediately. The reason listed was a single phrase, bureaucratic and bloodless. Eligibility under review. Which was another way of saying, cancelled. Strong women recognize strong women. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. Lena didn't sleep that night. She sat at the small desk in her hotel room with the email open on her screen, and she worked. Not frantically. Methodically. The way she had always worked when something was trying to come apart. She got quiet, she got systematic, and she started pulling at threads. She went through every document the Foundation had sent her over the past 4 months. Every email. Every form she had filled out. Every piece of supporting evidence she had submitted. She had done everything right. She knew she had, because she always did. Because she was a black woman operating in rooms that were waiting to find a reason, and she had long ago decided she would never give them one. The paperwork was clean. The application was complete. There was nothing, not a single line, that justified the word review. Which meant the review wasn't about the paperwork. She closed her laptop at 2 a.m. and sat in the dark for a while. She thought about the silver-haired man. The way he had looked past her. The way the word teacher had come out of his mouth like a classification rather than a title. She thought about Chairman Kong Do-hyun at the door. That look he had given Juncio. She thought about what Juncio's face had done when she asked if a fair hearing was all it was. Then she thought about Marcus and his missing front teeth and his book, and she went to bed. In the morning, she called Juncio's office. His assistant answered and told her, with careful courtesy, that Mr. Kong was in back-to-back meetings until noon. Lena left her name and number. She went down to breakfast. She ate slowly. She watched the city through the restaurant window, the density of it, the speed, the way Seoul moved like it was always already late for something. He called back in 40 minutes. You saw the email, he said. When were you going to tell me? A beat of silence. I found out an hour before you did. I'm still pulling the internal trail. Who sent it? I don't know yet. He said it cleanly, without hedging. She believed him. Not because she trusted him fully. She didn't, not yet. But because a man who wanted to deceive her would have offered a more elaborate answer. I need 24 hours. My return flight is in 36. I know. Another pause. Can you meet me tonight? Not at the office. The restaurant he named was quiet, small, tucked into a neighborhood that clearly had no interest in impressing anyone. He was already there when she arrived, sitting in a back corner booth. No staff, no security she could see. He stood when she walked in. She noticed that. Not performatively, just the automatic reflex of someone whose mother had raised him with a particular Korean formality around elders and guests. She was neither, exactly. But the reflex was there. They ordered. She got something with tofu and broth that turned out to be remarkable. He got the same thing. Neither of them commented on it. My uncle, he said finally. She set her spoon down. I can't prove it yet. But the administrative reclassification came through a channel that he controls. It has his fingerprints in the structure of it. He looked at her directly. He doesn't want your school in the program. Why? Because I do. He said it simply, without drama, like it was just a fact. And he has been paying very close attention to everything I want lately. Lena was quiet for a moment. Outside the restaurant window, Sol kept moving. Is this personal between you and him, or is it business? With my uncle, Junseo said. Those are the same thing. She looked at him. Really looked, not at the CEO, not at the boy she half remembered, but at the man sitting in front of her now. Tired around the eyes in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. Careful in a way that was clearly permanent. You should know, he said, that there's more. My uncle has also been pushing me, for the past 8 months, to withdraw the international school network from the Foundation's primary agenda entirely. Lena felt something cold move through her. The network, she said carefully. How large is it? He held her gaze. Your school wasn't supposed to be one of 20, he said. It was supposed to be one of one. The first. The founding model. The proof of concept that everything else was built around. The restaurant was very quiet. Why my school? She asked, though somewhere underneath the question, she already knew. He looked at his hands. Then back at her. Because you already built what I've been spending 15 years and $1 billion trying to create. He said it without self-pity. Just fact. I didn't have to design it. I just had to find it. And I found it when I found you. Lena sat with that. She sat with the weight of what it meant, that her underfunded, understaffed, quietly heroic little school in Atlanta was the architecture. The original. That someone had looked at what she built with almost nothing and seen, in it, the shape of something that could change thousands of children's lives. She sat with the fact that that same someone had let her walk into a boardroom unprepared for what was coming. You knew your uncle would try to remove me, she said. He didn't deny it. And you let me walk in there anyway. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I wanted to see what I would do, she finished. The silence between them was different now. Junseo. She said his name quietly, not unkindly, but fully. I am not a test. He looked at her for a long moment. No, he said finally. You are not. He said it like a man who had just understood something he should have understood before he ever sent the invitation. She picked up her spoon. She finished her soup. And on the flight back to Atlanta the next morning, her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. 4 words, followed by a file attachment. You need to see this. She opened the attachment. It took her 3 full minutes to understand what she was looking at. When she did, her hands went cold. This channel is for women who have learned the hard way that dignity matters. If that sounds like you, I'd love to have you here. The document was 31 pages long. Lena read it in the back of a cab on the way to the airport, missing her gate announcements, reading it again on the plane with her tray table down and her breakfast untouched. It was dense, financial language, foundation bylaws, internal board memos, but she had spent 20 years decoding school district bureaucracy, and she understood documents that were designed to obscure. By the time the Seoul skyline was behind her and there was nothing outside her window but clouds, she understood what she was holding. Someone inside the foundation had been systematically restructuring the international school network's funding allocation for the past 14 months. Not eliminating it. That would have been visible, trackable, easy to fight. Instead, they had been shifting it, quietly, incrementally, buried in budget line items that would only become obvious in aggregate, away from the underserved school model and toward higher-profile partnerships with established private institutions. In other words, away from children like hers, toward children who were already fine. She closed the document and looked out the window for a long time. She thought about something Junseo had said at dinner, that the network was supposed to be built around her school's model, which meant someone had looked at that model, understood what it represented, and decided, deliberately, over 14 months, to dismantle it from the inside before it could ever become the standard. Not incompetence. Strategy. She landed in Atlanta at 6 a.m. She went straight to the school. It was early, but 3 of her teachers were already there. That was one of the things about her staff. They arrived early because they wanted to, because this building meant something to them the way it meant something to her. Patricia was setting up the reading corner in second grade. Deshawn was fixing a ceiling light in the hallway that had been flickering for a week. Maya, her youngest teacher, barely 24 years old and better with struggling kids than people twice her age, was sitting on the floor of her classroom organizing book bins. Lena stood in the doorway and watched her for a moment. Maya looked up. "You're back. How was Seoul?" "Educational," Lena said. Maya laughed. She had a good laugh. Open, easy. The kind of laugh that made children feel safe. Lena went to her office. She sat down. She looked at the photo of the third grade class. Marcus, front row, missing teeth, book held up. She picked up her phone. She called a number she hadn't used in years. A woman named Gloria who had worked in school district legal affairs for 2 decades and knew more about education funding structures than anyone Lena had ever met. "I need a favor," she said when Gloria picked up. "And I need you to not ask me too many questions yet." Gloria was quiet for a moment. "Is this bad?" "It might be." "Okay." Another pause. "Give me what you have." Lena sent the document. She spent the next 3 hours in back-to-back conversations with her staff, normal morning operations, her face giving nothing away. She watched her teachers teach. She watched children arrive, loud and sleepy and complicated and beautiful, and she understood with total clarity, sitting in that hallway watching them come through the door, that she would not let this happen. Not this quietly. Not to these children. Gloria called back at noon. "Lena," she said without preamble. "Who sent you this?" "I don't know yet." Because whoever did is either very brave or very scared. This document, if it's authentic, and it reads like it is, this is a paper trail that leads directly to a pattern of fiduciary misconduct inside a registered international foundation. A beat. This isn't just about your school. This is about every school that was supposed to be in this network. Lena pressed her fingers against the edge of her desk. "How do I fight it?" "You don't, alone. You need someone with standing inside the foundation to take this forward formally. Someone who can call a board review without it getting buried." Gloria paused. "Do you have anyone like that?" Lena thought about a restaurant in Seoul. A quiet booth. A man who had said, "You are not a test," in the voice of someone who meant it. "Maybe," she said. "Maybe isn't good enough." "I know." She hung up. She sat for a moment in the particular silence of a decision being made. Then she picked up her phone again and found Jun Seo's number. He answered on the second ring. "Did you read it?" he asked. No greeting. "Yes." She paused. "Did you send it?" "No," he said. "But I know who did. One of my finance directors. She's been watching the reallocation for 6 months. She came to me this morning. What does she want? Protection. And for someone to do something with what she found." A pause. "I'm calling an emergency board meeting." Lena stood up from her desk. She walked to her window, the one that looked out over the schoolyard. 2 kids were arguing about something on the basketball court. A teacher walked over, crouched down, said something. Both kids laughed. "When?" she asked. 4 days, he said. "Can you come back?" She watched the kids on the court for another moment. "I'll be there," she said. She was already writing the boarding pass confirmation in her head when he said the next thing. Quietly. Almost like he didn't intend for it to come out. "My uncle knows about the whistleblower." The yard outside went on, bright and normal. "How?" "I don't know yet." His voice had changed. Just slightly. Just enough for her to catch it. The first time she had heard anything in him that sounded close to fear. "But Lena, he moves fast when he feels threatened. And he knows you're coming back." She stood very still. "Are you telling me to be careful?" A long pause. "I'm telling you," he said quietly, "that I should have told you a lot of things sooner. And I'm sorry that I didn't." She held the phone against her ear. Outside, the bell rang, and the kids poured off the court and back inside, and the yard went empty and quiet. She thought about a graduation day she only half remembered. A boy in a good shirt, holding flowers, talking too fast because he was nervous. One day I will repay this. She had smiled. She had let him go. She had never imagined it would loop back like this, with this much at stake, this much at risk, this much already in motion. I'll see you in 4 days, she said. She hung up. She sat back down at her desk, opened her laptop, and started building her case. She was going to walk into that boardroom knowing everything. This time, nobody was going to ask her to leave. If you're a woman who believes respect is worth more than money, go ahead and subscribe. These are the stories we tell here. She noticed the man at the gate before she noticed anything else. Not because he was doing anything obvious. He was just standing, near the check-in counter, holding a phone, not looking at it. He was Korean, 40s, well-dressed in the specific way of someone whose clothes are expensive but chosen not to impress. He had the particular stillness of someone who was waiting without looking like he was waiting. Lena walked past him. She checked in. She went through security. She found her gate. He was there 20 minutes later. She sat with that for a moment. Then she took out her phone and typed a message to Juncio. Is someone watching me? The 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Where are you? Gate 14. Hartsfield. A pause. Longer than she expected. Don't change your seat on the plane. She stared at her screen. Why would I? I'll explain when you land. Don't change your seat. She looked up. The man near the gate was reading something on his phone now. Or appearing to. She breathed. She put her phone away. She picked up the chapter she had been trying to read for 2 weeks and opened it to a random page and stared at the words without seeing them. This was new territory. She had fought for funding before. She had sat in hostel rooms before. She had been underestimated and dismissed and talked over for 20 years, and she had built a school anyway. But she had never been watched at an airport. She landed in Seoul 14 hours later. Juncio met her in the arrivals hall himself, which she had not expected. No assistant, no driver, just him in a dark coat with his hands in his pockets, looking like a man who hadn't slept enough. Was I followed? She asked before he could say anything. We don't think so. The man at the gate was likely just confirming your flight. He fell into step beside her. My uncle's people wouldn't take a next step without instruction. He's not there yet. But he might get there. If he feels the board meeting is going to expose him, yes. They walked for a moment. The airport was loud and bright around them. Why did you meet me yourself? She asked. He glanced at her sideways. Because I owe you a conversation I should have had before I invited you into this. They found a corner of the terminal, a bench away from the main flow of foot traffic. They sat down. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, and he talked. He told her the full architecture of what he had built and why. The international school network. The funding structure. The long game he had been playing quietly for years. Not because it was strategic, he said, but because he had sat in a classroom in Atlanta at 16 years old and understood what it meant to be a child that a system had decided was not worth the investment. He had understood it because someone had refused to accept that verdict. And he had spent 15 years trying to build a structure that would refuse it systemically, for thousands of children at a time. Your school was the proof, he said, that it was possible, that you could build it with almost nothing, if you had the right people and the right belief. Lena listened. My uncle found out the network was the center of the foundation's forward strategy about a year ago. He started working against it immediately. Not because of the money, exactly, though that's part of it. But because, he paused. Because it was mine. And because there are people on that board who have been waiting for a reason to move against me, and he's been giving them material. And I'm part of the material. You are the part that matters most, he said. If they can discredit the founding model, if they can eliminate your school and make the case that the whole network concept is flawed at the root, the board can justify dismantling everything. Lena looked at the floor. At the movement of people and luggage and lives flowing past. You should have told me this before I came the first time, she said. Yes. You put me in that room without warning me. Yes. His voice didn't waver. I was wrong to do that. I told you in Seoul, and I'm telling you again now. I was wrong. She looked at him. There was something difficult in his face. Not guilt exactly, but the particular expression of a person who has made a decision they understood was wrong and cannot fully explain why they made it anyway. Like the reasoning had made sense at the time, and now, hearing himself account for it, he could hear the gap. She thought about what it meant for a man like Jun Seo to say I was wrong out loud, in direct eye contact, without hedging. She thought about what his uncle must be to him, not just a boardroom adversary, but family. The particular weight of Korean family hierarchy. The impossible pressure of disappointing someone who had been an authority figure your whole life. She didn't excuse it, but she understood it. What happens in 4 days? She asked. I present the financial evidence of misconduct. I table the founding model proposal formally. I call a full board vote. And if your uncle moves to have you removed before that? Jun Seo was quiet for a moment. Then we deal with that, he said. Together, if you're willing. Lena studied his face. The fluorescent lights of the terminal were not flattering. He looked tired in them. Real. Not the CEO. Just a person who had built something important and was watching someone try to tear it down, and who needed, not a test, not a symbol, but an ally. She stood up. I need to check into the hotel and sleep, she said. Board meeting is in 4 days. She picked up her carry-on. Lena. He said it quietly. She looked back. Thank you, he said, for coming back. She held his gaze for one moment. Don't thank me yet, she said. We haven't won anything. She walked toward the exit. Behind her, she heard him exhale. One long breath. What she didn't see, what she wouldn't know until 2 days later, was that Jun Seo stayed on that bench for several minutes after she left. That he took out his phone. That he looked at the screen for a long time without using it. That when he finally did call someone, it wasn't a board member or a lawyer. It was his mother. And whatever she said to him, 2 minutes, quiet, in Korean, in the corner of a bright airport terminal, left him sitting very still with his hand pressed flat against his chest. Like someone pressing down on something that was just beginning to hurt. The call came at 4 a.m. Lena was awake already. She had been awake since 2, the jet lag and the circumstances conspiring against sleep. She was sitting at the desk with her case documents spread out in front of her when her phone lit up. Unknown number. Korean area code. She answered it. Ms. Brooks. A woman's voice. Young. Precise. A slight tremor underneath the precision. Controlled but not quite controlled enough. My name is Soo-yeon. I work in the Foundation's finance division. I sent you the document. Lena was very still. I'm listening. I need you to understand something before the board meeting. A pause. The sound of breathing. What's in that document is real. But there's a second document. One I didn't send. One I found 3 days ago. What's in it? It shows. Soo-yeon stopped. Started again. It shows that the reclassification of your school's funding was not the first action taken. It was the third. There were 2 other interventions before it. One of them happened 11 months ago, before your school was even formally submitted for the program. Lena's hand tightened on the phone. That's not possible, she said slowly. The application. Your application was never at risk, Soo-yeon said. It was flagged, internally, by someone who identified your school, and you, specifically, long before the formal review process. The room was very quiet. Why? Lena asked. A pause. Because of who submitted the internal recommendation to include your school in the founding model. Soo-yeon's voice had dropped. It wasn't an open committee decision. It wasn't a program assessment. One person recommended your school for the founding position. Specifically. By name. Lena already knew the answer. She asked anyway. Who? Jun Seo, Soo-yeon said. He submitted the recommendation 14 months ago. Internally. Before the formal invitation process. Before any of the board knew. The city outside Lena's window was dark and enormous. He personally identified you as the founding model before the Foundation had officially moved the network to active development. A pause. His uncle found out 8 months ago. That's when the interference started. Not because of the school's merit. The school's merit was never in question. Because of why Junseo chose it. Lena set down her pen. She thought about the boardroom. The silver-haired man and his polished dismissal. The email on her phone. The man at the gate. The 14 months of interference buried in spreadsheet line items. She thought about what it meant that someone had looked at her school, her underfunded, overworked, deeply real school, 14 months ago and said, "That's the one." And then had not told her. "Why are you calling me?" Lena asked. Because the second document also shows something else. Soo-yeon exhaled. There is a motion being drafted. Not for the board meeting in 4 days. For tomorrow morning. An emergency session. Emergency sessions don't require full board presence. They only require a quorum of senior members. And the senior members who would be present are loyal to his uncle, Lena finished. Yes. A beat. If the emergency session happens before the full board meeting, they can table the network proposal indefinitely. Formally. With board record. And once it's tabled indefinitely, Junseo cannot reintroduce it without a full board supermajority vote. A pause. Which he does not have. Lena stood up from the desk. What time is the emergency session? 8:30. I have the room number. Send it. Ms. Brooks. Soo-yeon's voice was thin now. If I send it and if it comes out that I told you, my career here is over. Possibly worse. Lena stood at her window. Soul below her, gray and lit, indifferent. I know, she said quietly. I'm not going to tell you what to do. A long pause. Her phone buzzed. A message. Room number, floor, building. Thank you, Lena said. The line went dead. She stood there for a moment. Then she called Junseo. He answered on the first ring. Emergency session, she said. Tomorrow. 8:30. Did you know? Silence. One beat too long. I just found out 20 minutes ago, he said. His voice was flat. The particular flatness of someone who has just had a thing confirmed they hoped was wrong. I was about to call you. We have to be in that room. We can't be in that room. We're not on the emergency session list. Are you telling me, Lena said carefully, that there is no mechanism by which you, as CEO, can be present at a meeting inside your own foundation? A pause. There is one, he said slowly. But if I invoke it, if I walk into that session without being on the list, my uncle will use it as confirmation that I'm acting outside board protocol. He'll add it to the removal motion. He's already removing you. I know. Then you have nothing left to lose by walking in. The silence was different this time. She heard him breathe. Be in the lobby at 8, he said. She hung up. She turned back to her desk. She looked at the documents. The photographs. The 31 children in the photo from last June, grinning in the morning light outside a building that someone, in a tower in Seoul, had decided should not exist. She thought about Marcus. 8 years old. Reading. She picked up her pen. She had 4 hours. She was going to use all of them. Because tomorrow morning, she was walking into a room where she had not been invited. And this time, she was not leaving. If you've ever been told you don't belong somewhere that you helped build, this channel was made for you. Subscribe. We're just getting started. The door opened before Junseo could knock. Chairman Kang Do-hyun stood in the frame of his office in a suit that cost more than most people's monthly salary, holding a cup of tea, looking entirely unsurprised. Like he had been expecting this visit. Like he had, in fact, been looking forward to it. Come in, he said in Korean. Then, with the particular deliberateness of a man making a point, he switched to English. Both of you. Lena hadn't expected to be included. She had waited in the corridor outside the emergency session room while Junseo requested an urgent private meeting with his uncle 40 minutes before the session was scheduled to begin. She had prepared herself to wait longer. But Do-hyun had asked for her specifically. She walked in. The office was enormous and spare. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a desk that held almost nothing, two chairs positioned across from it with the careful geometry of a room designed to remind visitors where power lived. On the credenza behind the desk, a single framed photograph, a much younger Do-hyun standing beside an older man with the same jawline. His father, Lena guessed. Jun-seo's grandfather. Do-hyun gestured toward the chairs. Neither of them sat. He looked at that for a moment. Something flickered across his face. Not offense, but a recalibration. He was reading them. The way powerful people read rooms, instantly, automatically, looking for leverage and weakness simultaneously. He found, she suspected, less of the second than he expected. "You know about the session," he said. Still in English. Watching her. "We do," Jun-seo said. "And you've come to ask me to cancel it." Do-hyun moved to his desk. He didn't sit either. He set down his tea. "That is not something I'm prepared to do." "I'm not asking you to cancel it." Jun-seo's voice was level. "I'm asking you to hear me before it begins." Do-hyun looked at his nephew for a long moment. There was something in that look that Lena couldn't fully read. Too layered, too old, built from decades of family history she wasn't part of. But she could read the broad shape of it. This was not simply an uncle and a nephew. This was a man who had helped build something, and a man who had inherited it, and 15 years of unspoken negotiation about what that debt meant. "Speak," Do-hyun said. Jun-seo spoke. He didn't lead with the financial misconduct. Lena had half expected him to lay the evidence on the desk the way you lay a card you know wins the hand. But he didn't. He led with something else entirely. He told his uncle about Atlanta. Not the scholarship. Not the school. He told him about the afternoon he had sat in the back of a classroom and understood, for the first time since coming to America, that the language barrier was not the real barrier. That what was keeping him small was not his English. It was his belief that the room had already decided he didn't belong. And that one person, one teacher who had no strategic reason to invest in him, had looked at him directly and refused to accept that verdict. Do-hyun was very still. "I built this network," Jun-seo said, "because I understood what that refusal cost her and what it gave me. And I will not dismantle it because it is inconvenient for our board's profit margins." The office was quiet. Do-hyun looked at Lena then. Not with contempt. She had braced for contempt and found something more complicated. He looked at her the way you look at something you have been misidentifying for months and are only now seeing clearly. "You're the teacher," he said. "I am," she said. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said something she didn't expect. "My father worked in a factory for 30 years, he said. He came home every night smelling like machine oil and never once complained. He sent me to school on a salary that had no business supporting a school like that." He looked at his hands. No one believed he belonged in that life either. He built it anyway. Lena didn't say anything. "What you do," Do-hyun said slowly, "is not nothing. I understand that." The room held its breath. "But what you're asking this foundation to prioritize." "I'm not asking you for anything," Lena said quietly. He looked at her. "I never asked for anything," she said. "I built what needed building because children needed it built. What I'm asking from this foundation is not charity. It's the partnership your CEO already committed to, before anyone thought to interfere with it." Do-hyun's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He looked at Jun-seo. Something passed between them. Not resolution, but the particular silence of two people who have just moved to a new position in a very old argument. "The session begins in 30 minutes, Do-hyun said finally. "I know," Jun-seo said. "I will not cancel it." "I know that too." Do-hyun picked up his tea. He looked out the window at Seoul below. Gray morning light, the city already in full motion. "Your grandfather," he said quietly, still looking out, "would have liked her." He said it the way men of his generation said the most important things. Sideways, barely, in a direction that allowed him to take it back if necessary. Jun-seo looked at his uncle for a moment. Then he said, "I know." They left the office. In the corridor, Lena exhaled slowly. That was not what I expected, she said. No, Junseo agreed. Do you think he'll? I don't know. He glanced at her. But he told you about his father. She looked at him. He has never, Junseo said quietly, told anyone about his father. They walked toward the elevator. 28 minutes until the session. Lena's phone buzzed. A message from Soo-yeon. 2 words. They know. She stopped walking. Junseo. He turned. She showed him the screen. His face changed. Fast. The controlled expression cracking along one seam. Not fear exactly. The face of someone recalculating everything at once. They know Soo-yeon talked to us, she said. Yes. What does that mean for her? He was already reaching for his own phone. It means the session is no longer about tabling the proposal. He looked up. It means they're going to use it to table me. This channel is for women who have learned the hard way that dignity matters. If that sounds like you, I'd love to have you here. The session room was already half full when they arrived. 7 senior board members, seated. The silver-haired man from the first meeting. His name was Director Lim, Lena had since learned, at the head of the table, with the settled posture of a man who had arranged the furniture himself. He looked up when they walked in. Something moved across his face. Surprise. Then, immediately, the recalibration of someone shifting from a plan to a contingency. This session is not open to observers, he said. I'm not an observer, Junseo said. He walked to the table. He did not ask for a seat. He stood at the end, hands at his sides, with a particular stillness that Lena had come to understand was not calm. It was precision. I'm invoking executive presence rights under the Foundation Charter. Article 7, Section 3. I have the right to be present at any board session convened under the Foundation's authority. Lim looked around the table. Looked back. Article 7 requires 24 hours advance notice of invocation. Article 7, Section 3, Paragraph B, Junseo said, waives the notice requirement when the CEO has documented reason to believe the session involves a motion that directly affects his standing. He set a single sheet of paper on the table. I have that documentation. The room was very quiet. Lena stood just inside the door. She had not been invited to sit. She was not going to ask. One of the board members she didn't recognize, younger, uncomfortable, not looking at anyone, shifted in his chair. Lim picked up the sheet. Read it. Set it down. You may observe, he said. His voice had changed. Just slightly. The confidence still there but thinner, like a coat worn in weather it wasn't made for. Thank you, Junseo said, and sat down. Lena found a chair along the wall. The session began. It took 11 minutes for the framing to become clear. The motion on the table was presented as a governance issue, a matter of fiduciary responsibility, leadership transparency, conflict of personal interest. Director Lim walked through it methodically. The language was careful, sanitized. Every sentence built to sound reasonable. But the architecture underneath it was simple. Junseo had used Foundation resources to pursue a personal agenda. The International School Network was that agenda. The founding model, Lena's school, had been selected not through proper committee process but through unilateral executive action driven by personal history. In other words, he let sentiment corrupt strategy. Lena sat with her hands in her lap and listened and did not move. She thought about a conversation she had had once with her mother years ago, about the specific experience of sitting in a room where people were debating your worth in language designed to sound neutral. The language is the weapon, her mother had said. The politeness is the blade. She thought about that now. Junseo did not interrupt. He listened with the same precision he had walked in with. He took notes on a small pad. Once or twice he wrote something and circled it. When Lim finished presenting the motion, he looked at Junseo. Do you have a response? I do, Junseo said. But first I'd like to ask a question. Lim gestured. The motion cites unilateral executive action, Junseo said. It references my internal recommendation 14 months ago to include Bright Futures Academy as the network's founding model. He looked around the table. I'd like to know which board member formally reviewed the Foundation's charter requirement for program model selection, because that requirement specifies executive recommendation followed by a finance review, followed by a feasibility assessment. He paused, all three of which were completed. On record. A beat. The motion implies I bypassed process, he said. The record shows I followed it. So I'm curious, who on this committee reviewed the record before drafting the motion? Silence. The young board member shifted again. Lim's expression had not changed. But the room had. The motion also cites conflict of personal interest. Jun Seo continued. I want to be transparent with this committee. Yes. I have a personal history with Ms. Brooks. She was my teacher. She wrote a letter that changed my life. And 14 months ago, when I was building a network designed to change the lives of children like I once was, I identified her school as the founding model because it was, by every measurable metric this foundation uses, the best qualified institution for that role. He looked directly at Lim. Personal history and professional merit are not mutually exclusive. If they were, every board member who has ever hired a qualified friend would be in violation. The room was a different temperature now. Lim set down his pen. Jun Seo reached into his jacket and produced a second document. He slid it to the center of the table. This is a 14-month audit of the Foundation's internal budget reallocations, he said. It was compiled by a member of the Finance Division and independently verified last night. He did not look at Lena. It documents a pattern of interference with the International School Network's funding. Interference that did not originate from executive action, but from a series of administrative overrides pushed through channels that report to this committee. No one picked up the document. Jun Seo left it where it was. I'm not asking this committee to abandon the motion, he said. I'm asking it to read that document before voting. Lim looked at the document. Looked at Jun Seo. This session was called to address leadership, Lim said. Yes, Jun Seo said. It was. Something in the way he said it made two board members look up at the same time. The door opened. Chairman Kong Do-hyun walked in. He did not speak. He did not look at his nephew. He pulled out the empty chair at the far end of the table, sat down, folded his hands, and looked at Director Lim with an expression that communicated, with complete economy, that he was here and that his presence had meaning. Lim looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at the document in the center of the table. He picked it up. If you're a woman who believes respect is worth more than money, go ahead and subscribe. These are the stories we tell here. The vote never happened. Lim read 6 pages of the audit document and called a recess. The recess lasted 40 minutes. Lena sat in the corridor with a cup of terrible vending machine coffee and watched Foundation staff move in and out of rooms with the particular urgency of people whose understanding of a situation has just been revised. Jun Seo stood near the window at the end of the hall, phone pressed to his ear, talking in a voice too low to hear. Do-hyun sat alone in a chair across from Lena. He had not looked at her since taking his seat in the session. He looked at her now. You knew about the audit document, he said. Yes. How long? Long enough. He was quiet for a moment. He had the stillness of a man processing something he had not fully allowed himself to process yet. She recognized the expression. She had seen it on children who were just beginning to understand that something they had trusted had failed them. Some of those reallocations, he said slowly, went through my office. I know. I did not authorize them personally. But they went through my office. He looked at his hands. Which means someone used my authority without my knowledge. And used it to do something. He stopped. Something that will be in the formal record, Lena said. Not unkindly. Just clearly. He looked at her sharply. She held his gaze. I'm not your enemy, she said. I never was. I'm a teacher who built a school for children who needed one. That's the whole of it. Whatever else has happened in this building, whatever politics and money and family pressure has been moving around this situation, that is the whole of what I am. Do-hyun was quiet for a long time. My nephew trusts you, he said finally. I know. He doesn't trust easily. Neither do I, she said. Something shifted in his face then. Not softening exactly, This was not a man who softened, but a recalibration, a re-seeing. When the recess ended and they filed back into the session room, the motion to address Jun Seo's leadership was not reintroduced. Instead, Lim called for a formal review of the audit findings. He proposed an independent committee. He used the language of process and governance, the same language he had used to build the motion against Jun Seo, and this time he used it to dismantle what had been built against the network. It was not an apology. It was not a concession. It was a powerful man finding the most face-preserving path to the right outcome, and Lena recognized it for what it was and said nothing. Jun Seo accepted the proposal without visible satisfaction. Do Hyun seconded it. The session ended at noon. In the corridor afterward, Lena found Soo Yun waiting near the elevator. Young, slight, dressed conservatively, holding a tablet against her chest with both arms like a shield. She looked like someone who had not slept and had spent the sleepless hours being afraid. When she saw Lena, she exhaled. "You're all right," Soo Yun said. "I'm all right." Lena touched her arm briefly. "Are you?" "I don't know yet." She looked past Lena toward the session room. "What happened?" "They're doing a formal review. Independent committee." Soo Yun closed her eyes for 1 second. "And the network?" Still standing. The relief on Soo Yun's face was the particular relief of someone who took an enormous risk for a result they couldn't guarantee and is only now, on the other side, allowing themselves to feel the weight of what they did. Lena looked at her. "What you did took courage," she said. "Real courage. Not the kind that feels heroic. The kind that's just terrifying." Soo Yun looked at her for a moment. Then, quietly, "You're exactly the way he described you." Lena paused. "What do you mean?" Soo Yun blinked. Like she had said something she hadn't meant to. Mr. Kong spoke about you. When the school was first identified for the program. He told the team." She stopped. "What did he tell the team?" Soo Yun looked down at her tablet. "He said the woman who built that school was the reason he understood what the network was supposed to be. And that when we met her, we would understand it too." Lena stood with that. She was still standing with it 20 minutes later when Jun Seo found her in the lobby, coat in hand, looking out at the street. "The full board meeting is still scheduled for tomorrow," he said. "The formal network vote." "I know. You'll present." She turned to look at him. There was something different about him now. Not relaxed, that wasn't the word, but unguarded in a way she hadn't seen before. The session was behind him. His uncle had walked into that room. The motion was dead. He had not won everything yet, but the thing that had been most immediately threatening was gone. And he was looking at her the way he had looked at her in the airport terminal. Like a person. Not a symbol. Not a debt. Not a test. Just her. "What did you think," she said carefully, "was going to happen between us? Long term?" He was quiet for a moment. "I didn't let myself think that far," he said. "Why not?" He looked at the street. The soul traffic, relentless and indifferent. "Because I wasn't sure," he said, "that I deserved to." She looked at him for a long moment. "That," she said quietly, "is the most honest thing you've said to me since I got here." He turned to look at her. And neither of them said anything else. Because some things don't need a sentence. Some things exist in the space between two people who are finally, after a great deal of difficulty, standing on the same ground. But that night, alone in her hotel room, Lena opened her email and found a message from the Foundation's legal office. The Independent Review Committee had been named. 3 of the 5 members reported to Director Lim. Strong women recognize strong women. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe so you don't miss the next one. She printed the committee list. She sat at the desk with it in front of her and she looked at the 5 names for a long time, long enough that the city outside her window went from gray to dark, and she thought about something her grandmother used to say. The first trick is always the obvious one. The second trick is the one you miss because you're still looking at the first. The emergency session had been the first trick. She hadn't missed it. This committee was the second. She called Jun Seo at 9 in the evening. "The committee," she said. "I saw it. 3 of 5. Report to Lim." "Yes." His voice was tight, not panicked, calculating. A captured review committee produces a report. The report goes to the full board before the vote tomorrow. If the report questions the audit's methodology, or even introduces ambiguity, it gives the board cover to table the network proposal pending further review. And further review means indefinite delay, which is functionally the same as a no. A pause. They don't need to win outright. They just need to introduce enough doubt that a majority of the board chooses caution. Lena looked at the list. Who are the other two? Dr. Yoon, from the Education Department. She's clean. She genuinely cares about the network's mission. And a man named Park Sung-jin, external auditor, brought in 6 months ago. A pause that lasted one beat too long. I don't know enough about Park yet. Then find out tonight. I'm already on it. She put the list down. Jun Seo, she said. There's something else I want to say. A beat. The audit document is strong, she said. The charter compliance is solid. Your position going into tomorrow is better than it was this morning. But I want to be honest with you about something. Okay. I've been in rooms like this before. Not like this exactly. Not with this much money and this much legal structure around it. But the core of it is the same. Powerful people who have decided on an outcome, working backward to find the justification. She paused. Evidence doesn't always win those rooms. Sometimes what wins is something they can't argue against. Which is what? Human truth, she said. The kind that makes it impossible for the people watching to pretend they didn't hear it. Silence. You want to speak at the board meeting, he said. I want to be prepared to speak if it becomes necessary. Another pause. If you speak and the vote still goes against us. Then it goes against us, she said. But I will not sit in that room again as a prop. If I'm there fully. Or I might as well go home. She heard him exhale slowly. All right, he said. Be ready. She hung up. She spent the next 2 hours going through everything. Every document, every figure, every metric the school had produced over the past 5 years. Reading speed improvements. Attendance rates. Teacher retention. Post-program outcomes for students who had graduated and moved on. She built it into an argument that didn't require anyone to care about dignity or history or a boy who once sat in the back of a classroom. It was a business case. A clean, precise, irrefutable business case. Just in case. Then she set it aside and wrote something different. Something shorter. Something that had nothing to do with numbers. She didn't show it to anyone. The full board meeting began at 10 the next morning. 41 people in the room. The largest board session of the year by attendance. Word had traveled, Lena understood, about the emergency session and the audit and the motion that had quietly been withdrawn. People had come to see what happened next. The independent committee presented first. The 2 members aligned with Lim questioned the audit's methodology. Carefully, professionally, with a kind of language that sounded rigorous until you understood enough to hear what it was doing. They did not call the findings false. They called them incomplete. They recommended deferral pending supplementary review. Dr. Yoon pushed back. Clearly and specifically, citing the audit sourcing and the charter's own standards for financial review. Park Sung-jin, the external auditor, sat through both presentations in silence. Then he spoke. He said the audit was sound. He said the methodology was standard. He said that in his professional assessment, a supplementary review was not only unnecessary but would itself require explanation. Director Lim looked at him. Park looked back. I was brought in to be independent, Park said simply. That is what I am being. The committee's report fractured into 2 findings. Majority. The audit was sound. Lim called for the board to proceed to the network proposal vote. Jun Seo stood and began his presentation. 15 minutes. Clean. Precise. Every number anchored, every projection conservatively modeled, every risk acknowledged and addressed. He was, Lena thought, the best prepared person in that room. He had always been the best prepared person in any room. She remembered that about the boy too. The ferocious preparation of someone who had learned early that he could not rely on the room being generous. When he finished, Lim opened the floor. 3 board members spoke against the proposal. The language was careful, measured. It kept returning to one word: premature. 2 board members spoke in favor. Then silence. Lim looked toward the vote. And Lena stood up. If you've ever had to stand alone to protect your dignity, this channel is made for you. Subscribe. This is where those stories live. Nobody had given her the floor. That was the first thing. She had not been recognized by the chair. She had not been on the agenda. She stood up from her chair along the wall, not a board member's chair, not a seat at the table, and she simply stood. Director Lim looked at her with a precise expression of a man calculating whether it was worth the optics of stopping her. He said nothing. So she spoke. She did not start with the school. She did not start with the children. She started with a question, asked quietly, without accusation, into the full attention of 41 people who had just spent an hour debating whether something that already existed and was already working was worth allowing to continue. What is the purpose of this foundation? No one answered. I read your charter, she said. I read it before my first trip to Seoul, and I read it again last night. The stated purpose is to build educational infrastructure that serves communities without adequate access to quality learning environments. She paused. That is not a vague mission. That is a specific one. And I have spent 20 years building exactly what that sentence describes. She looked around the table. Not with anger. Not with the tight brightness of someone performing calm. With the steady, unhurried eye contact of someone who has nothing to prove and knows it. I understand what's been said about process and governance and premature expansion, she said. I understand those words and what they mean and what they're doing in this conversation. I've heard versions of them my whole career, in every school board meeting where someone wanted to delay rather than decide, in every funding hearing where the path of least resistance was to wait. She let that land. The children in my school cannot wait, she said. They are not a concept. They are not a line item in a risk assessment. They are Marcus, who is 9 years old and read his first full book 3 months ago and cried when he finished it because he had started to believe he couldn't. They are Destiny, who comes in an hour before school starts every morning because her home is loud and my school is the quietest place she knows. The room was absolutely still. I am not asking this board to be charitable, she said. I am asking it to do what its charter says it exists to do. Nothing more. Nothing less. She sat down. The silence lasted 4 full seconds. Then Chairman Kang Do-hyun, who had not spoken once during the entire meeting, cleared his throat. Every head turned. He sat with his hands folded on the table, looking at nothing in particular, in the way of a man who has made a decision and is now simply delivering it. I would like to revise my position on the motion, he said. Director Lim turned to look at him. I've had the opportunity, Do-hyun said carefully, to review the full audit documentation. I've also had the opportunity to understand the Foundation's involvement in this network proposal from its inception. He glanced at Jun-seo. My nephew followed process. The school meets the criteria. The audit stands. He looked at Lim. I will be voting in favor of the proposal. The room exhaled. Lim sat very still. 2 of the 3 board members who had spoken against the proposal exchanged a look. One of them looked down at the table. The vote was called. 26 in favor. 9 against. 6 abstentions. The International School Network was approved. Lena sat with her hands in her lap and felt something move through her. Not triumph, nothing that sharp. Something quieter. The particular relief of a person who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and has just, finally, been allowed to set it down. Jun-seo looked at her from across the room. She nodded once. He nodded back. After the session formally closed and the room began to empty, Do-hyun stopped beside her chair on his way out. He didn't crouch down, didn't make a production of it. He simply paused. What you said, he said quietly. About the boy. Marcus. Yes. My father taught himself to read at 42 years old, he said. After he retired from the factory. He straightened his jacket. He said it was the best thing he ever did. He walked out. Lena sat for a moment longer. The room was nearly empty now. Just her and the long table and the sole skyline through the windows and the particular silence of a room where something real had just happened. Junseo came to stand beside her. "It passed," he said. "I know. You should feel." "I know what I feel," she said. "Give me a minute." He sat down in the chair beside her. He didn't talk. He just sat. And for a minute, just one, Lena Brooks let herself feel the weight of 20 years and what it had produced, and what it had cost, and what it had just, against considerable opposition, been allowed to become. Then she picked up her bag. "You said you wanted to offer something," she said. "A financial package." "Yes. I don't want it." He looked at her. "I know," he said. "I already knew you'd say that." A pause. "What do you want?" She had the piece of paper she'd written the night before in her bag. She took it out. She put it on the table in front of him. He read it. His expression changed. Slowly, the way light changes in a room when a cloud moves. "This is," he started. "What the network should be," she said. "From the ground up. Not just my school. All of them." He looked at the paper for a long moment. 3 things. A proper salary structure for every teacher. A student support fund requiring only a teacher's recommendation. And one founding principle. Every child who enters any school in this network will be treated as someone worth believing in. He looked up at her. "Will you help me build it?" he asked. She looked at him. "That's what I came to Seoul for," she said. He didn't stand up right away. That was the thing that stayed with her afterward. Not the vote, not the speech, not the long negotiations that had brought them to this final session where the network's founding charter would be formally ratified. What stayed with her was the moment before he stood. The moment when Kang Junseo sat very still at the head of that table, looking at the document that bore both their names at the bottom, his as CEO and founder, hers as director of the founding model, and something moved through his face that had nothing to do with business. He looked like a man arriving somewhere he had been traveling toward for a very long time. Then he stood. The full board was present. 41 people, the same room, 4 days after the vote. The charter was on the table in front of each of them. Printed, formal, bound. 3 pages. The kind of document that becomes the thing organizations point to when they want to explain what they were supposed to be. Lena sat at the table this time. A board seat, not a wall chair, not a visitor's position. A seat at the table, with her name on a small placard, because Junseo had proposed and the board had approved a founding advisory role that gave her formal standing. She had not asked for it. He had done it before she could object. She had let him. He presented the charter. He walked through each section, the mission language, the funding structure, the teacher compensation framework, the student support protocols. Every element she had written on that piece of paper the night before the final vote was now in formal legal language, ratified and recorded. When he reached the founding principle, the last section, the shortest one, he read it aloud. Every child who enters any school in this network will be treated as someone worth believing in. He read it once. He did not editorialize. But his voice, just briefly on the word believing, did something she noticed and did not comment on. The board voted to ratify. Unanimous. Even Director Lim. After the session closed, the board members filed out with a particular energy of people who understood something significant had just been recorded. Several of them stopped to speak to Lena on their way out. Formally, professionally, with the specific courtesy of people who are reintroducing themselves after having previously failed to introduce themselves properly. She received each of them the same way. Directly. Without coldness. Without performance. When the room had mostly emptied, Junseo crossed to where she was standing. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. "Something I should have said already." She waited. "The board meeting," he said. "The first one. When Lim asked you to leave. I remember it clearly." "I knew he was going to do it," Junseo said. "Not the specific moment. But I knew there was a strong likelihood someone would challenge your presence in that room. And He stopped. "I wanted to know what you would do. Whether you would fight back or argue or..." Whether I would shrink, she said. He held her gaze. Yes. And now? And now I know that what I put you through to get that answer was wrong, he said. I've said it before. I'm saying it again because I don't think once was enough. He paused. You already knew who you were. You didn't need me to construct a test to find out. I needed to trust what I already knew, and I didn't, and I put you in a humiliating situation because of my own failure to trust. I'm sorry. The room was quiet around them. Lena looked at him for a long moment. She thought about what it had cost her to stay in this fight. Not just the trips and the jet lag and the late nights. The deeper cost, allowing herself to trust someone with enough power to hurt her again after 20 years of building careful walls around what she let matter. She thought about the first morning she walked into her school after coming home from Seoul and stood in the doorway of Maya's classroom and watched a child laugh for the first time in weeks. She thought about what it would have cost to walk away. You're not the same boy who sat in the back of my classroom, she said. No. But you still do that thing, she said, where you go very still when you're deciding whether to trust yourself. He looked at her. You used to do it before you read aloud, she said. That little pause. You thought I didn't notice. Something happened in his face then. Something that was not the CEO, not the chairman's nephew, not the man who had built a billion-dollar empire from a scholarship letter. Just a person. I noticed everything, she said simply. He was quiet for a moment. What happens now, he said. Not about the network. About something else. Both of them knew what he meant. She picked up her bag. Now, she said, we build what we said we would build. And we see what else is true. It was not a yes. It was not a no. It was the most honest answer she had. The answer of a woman who had learned to move toward things at the pace that the truth required, not the pace that feeling demanded. He understood. She could see that he did. Outside the boardroom, in the wide corridor with its floor-to-ceiling windows and the endless city below, the remaining board members were gathered in small clusters. Talking, dispersing, the ordinary movement of people after something formal has ended. Jun Seo stopped at the threshold of the room. He turned back to face the table, the long polished surface, the small placards, the bound charters sitting in front of each empty seat. And then, slowly, he bowed. Not to the table. Not to the room. To the chair where Lena had been sitting. It was a deep bow, the kind that carries full meaning in Korean formality, the kind that does not get offered to titles or money or board positions. The kind reserved for someone you owe a debt that cannot be repaid, only honored. He held it for a full 3 seconds. When he straightened, his expression was clear. Not performed. Not strategic. Just true. Lena had seen it. She was already in the corridor. She had turned back at just the right moment and seen the whole of it. She did not cry. She did not need to. She simply stood there in the light coming through the Seoul windows and held what had just happened in the particular quiet of a person who has fought for something real and watched it become real, and who knows, in the same moment, that the world being what it is, there will be more fighting ahead. But today, this was enough. This was more than enough. Later, much later, on a plane back to Atlanta with the charter documents in her bag and Marcus's reading level report open on her laptop, she would think about what she would tell her teachers on Monday morning. Not the whole story. Just the part that mattered. Past, she would say. Now we build. And somewhere over the Pacific, with Seoul behind her and Atlanta ahead, and the network's founding principle recorded in a legal document that bore her name, Lena Brooks let herself smile. Not for the board. Not for Jun Seo. Not for anyone who had tried to make her leave a room. For Marcus. For destiny. For every child who would walk through a door in a school they had never heard of yet, in a city they had never been to, and be treated, from their very first day, as someone worth believing in. Because that was the whole of it. That had always been the whole of it. If you are a woman who has ever poured everything into something that mattered and refused to let it go, this channel was built for you. Subscribe. We have more stories to tell. Thank you for watching Afro Korean Tales and Stories. As we close this story, I want to say something to the women watching. Some of you have lived through moments like this. Moments where you had to stand alone. Moments where you chose dignity over comfort. Moments where you refused to be bought, silenced, or pushed aside. That kind of strength doesn't always make noise, but it changes rooms. If you are a woman who believes respect is worth more than money, if you believe character still matters, if you believe dignity should never be negotiated, then this channel was made for you. I tell stories about women who stand firm, women who earn respect without begging for it, women who remind powerful people that integrity cannot be purchased. If that speaks to you, I invite you to subscribe and become part of this community. And if this story touched you, comment the word dignity below. I read your comments, and they help these stories reach more women like you. Until the next story, remember, not every powerful person leads with honor, but every strong woman carries it within her. I'll see you in the next one.